interacted with her one, it only gave mana regeneration. Like, Guan Yu's old passive only interacted with his heal. That's only a fourth of his kit. That's only a fourth of what the god does, so why are you locking in a passive into one ability? It almost seems as if the passive should just be an add-on to the ability, and then he should get a new passive, kind of like what Afro did. So, they follow that same type of theme with Guan. So, I think that's good in general, just from a game design standpoint. That's a really, really good change. I like it a lot. The problem is Guan Yu was a really good god, so you're kind of playing with fire. You don't want to buff him too much, obviously. So, healing increased from 50 to 170 to 100 to 340 when boosted by Painless. So, that's basically the same thing. It basically means all of his abilities will be slightly more potent with his new passive, but the heal, for example, is the best way to, or like example to give. The old passive would, depending how stacked it would increase his healing from that amount that you see there, potentially to doubling it from 170 to 340. I think if I'm reading this right, his max heal now goes from 170 to 510. I don't know if that's correct. Somebody in chat correct me if I'm wrong about that. But basically, he doesn't get to keep reusing his passive over and over. You have to make a conscious decision to choose to use his passive for one singular heal and not for a ton throughout a fight. So his burst healing will be increased, but his sustained healing will be decreased. And I think that's the way you want to balance healers probably, is you want to give them burst healing, preferably single target. AoE healing is much harder balance, but because he is an AoE healer, giving him sustained healing like 5 times in 10 seconds, if not 10 seconds, but like Guan with his ability to reset cooldowns on his old passive, he'd be able to heal like 5 times in 15 seconds or less if he had max CDR. So you would just be pumping out a bunch of like heals like 200, 200, 200, and his healing would stack up. Now you're probably only going to heal once in that time, but it's going to be for 510 if you use the full passive. So bigger burst heal, less healing overall. I think that's a good change. Warrior's Will, slow increase from 30% to 60% when boosted by Painless. This is probably the weakest application of it, but still really cool. It still gives you an option if you need a slow, if you have like a Kali or something, if you have an auto attacker that needs help sticking on somebody, a hunter that needs help closing a gap to stick on somebody, that's a good option to use. Telu Assault just increases your protection steal from 50% when boosted by Painless. Just pretty good. Gives him more shred, helps him offensively in a team fight for both himself and teammates. Increases his own damage output, his teammates, blah blah blah. Cavalry Charge, this is a big one. The slow is increased from 20% to 40%, and stun increased from 1 second to 2 seconds when boosted. So keep in mind, all of these changes are only when the passive is max stacked. This is not just base buffs to Guan. Like, Guan just isn't getting... These aren't all just normal buffs he's going to get all the time. This is only one time from his passive. Just makes his ult a little bit better. This helps him in the support role, whereas previously he was picked as a support for his healing. Now he is worse as a healer, but he'll be picked in the support role for more crowd control and stuff like that. So I actually just like that change all around. I think that makes Guan Yu a lot more fun to play, and I think that's one of the best passive changes I've ever seen Hi-Rez do. I like that a lot. Okay. Hell, I went over, covered healing. Nezha, similar to Aphrodite, Nezha's old passive only affected one ability. That's why I was saying about Guam, that this type of passive sucks. All these passive reworks have been really good. In a way that didn't feel rewarding, the new passive has a critical chance buff attached to it that rewards you for staying in combat. It also retains the heal from Flaming Spear, but does not consume the stacks, removing the cumbersome trade-off of his old passive. So, new passive, Nezha gains stacks from successful basic attacks and ability hits, and 2 times stacks from critical hits. Each stack provides him with 0.5% crit chance. So, putting crit onto a god in their kit, similar to what Artemis has, is really, really risky, because it makes the god a little bit more RNG related. It's going to feel really, really bad if you get hit by a Nezha crit when his passive is at low stack, so that element of it I don't really like, but I do like that the passive interacts with his entire kit. I just wish that if they wanted to buff the damage output, they would have chosen to do something like just raw physical power instead of crit. But I guess I can't complain too much. This just makes him much more fun to play. It makes crits are really fun to play with in general. It's just from a competitive standpoint, RNG is a pain in the ass to deal with. Flaming Spear now heals up to 15% of Nezha's maximum HP, depending on how many stacks. So, just old passive, put on to the 2, keeps the 2's utility that it had, give him a better passive. Overall buff to Nezha, is it optimal competitively to buff him like that? I'm not sure, but it'll be a lot more fun to play, and it might not be as fun to play against if you get crit, but whatever, I think it's an overall good game design change. Odin. Odin's new passive fits his lore very well and I love that. I really love my passives to fit the lore. I'm really big on that. I love role-playing. And gives him a unique killstreak playstyle. This ability triggers from the deaths of allied and enemy gods anywhere on the map. Oh, I didn't even know it was anywhere on the map. That's crazy. So Odin will be powering up anytime a fight is unfolding. His old passive still exists as part of his ultimate, rewarding players for confirming kills instead of the ring spears. So, old passive, every kill that happened inside of your ring gave you 5%, or not 5%, gave you plus 5 attack power for each god that died in it. I believe it's stacked 10 times for a maximum of 50 physical power. I think it'll be the same thing. And now, new passive, Path to Valhalla. Whenever any god dies on the battleground, which I guess means the entire map, Odin gains 10% movement speed and 10% power for 10 seconds. The buff can stack up to 5 times. Okay. That's actually insane in a 5v5 team fight. It's kind of a snowball mechanic where if your team gets the first pick in a team fight, you're much more likely to get the second kill and so on and so forth if Odin gets his passive. It helps him late game a lot with the power. Now his bird bomb. The current version of Odin is you're an alt bot and your early game you're just burst with your 1-2 with your jump. And then late game, you're an alt bot. That's all of Odin right now. Has barely any like high level skill play in it. You just jump on people, you cage them. That's it. That's all you do. With his new passive, if a fight gets rolling and people are dying, you actually get late game scaling, which is really nice. I don't like the movement speed on it at all. I don't get why so many changes involve movement speed. It's like we're supposed to be playing like a bunch of race cars. Movement speed just feels really clunky to... I don't like the movement speed because imagine you're on the enemy team and somebody in the game died and you're trying to hit Odin with an ability and he suddenly is just a shit ton faster and you can't hit him. Like, there's no counterplay to that. Like, there's no counterplay to movement speed in the general sense. Like, you could say Creeping Curse or Frostbound Hammer, but like, that's not a reliable counter. Movement speed is just really clunky to play against because you just can't account for it all the time. And having those random sporadic movement speed increases, and they can sometimes be random, like if you're in Soul Lane, and for example, if you're like a Bellona, and you're trying to aim your Bellona on an Odin to try to kill him, and your duo lane dies, if I'm reading this correctly, if somebody in your duo lane dies, they just gave Odin a movement speed increase to get away from your ult, and maybe you can't kill him anymore. Like, that's not something you can play around. That just feels really, really bad to play around. I think they should I would rather see that be protection, like 5 protection for each enemy that died, or something like that. Anything but movement speed I would have loved on that passive. Overall, it's a cooler passive, and it'll be a lot more fun to play with, but playing against movement speed is just a pain in the ass, and I hate that. So, kind of a bittersweet change. I think Odin did need a buff like this. This is definitely a buff. I think he did need a buff because putting Ghost Walking on the Relic Phantom makes him a lot less viable for just his ring, so he needs to do something other than his ult to be viable, and his passive does help him do that. I just wish it wasn't movement speed. Okay, moving on. Raijin, remove magical protection, scaling. Oh, okay, so this is just defensively. Most carries don't actually have magical protection scaling. I believe every god in the game has base physical protection scaling, like you have a base number for your physical procs, and as you level up in the game, you gain more until level 20. Raijin also had this on magical prot. I believe only Guardians and Warriors have magical prot scaling. Other classes, like I don't know if Hunters have it at all, but not every god has magical prot scaling. Is basically what I'm trying to say. They took it away from Raijin. This makes him less tanky, which I think is good. He does so much burst damage that he needs to be punished for using something like his dash. If he chooses to use his dash offensively, he needs to be able to be punished by that, and giving away or taking away some of his tankiness gives you an opportunity to do that. So, good change. Somebody said that Raijin and Zhang had magical scaling, so now only Zhang does, and Freya does too. So those are two mages. Zhang and Freya are the two mages. And then someone said everyone has magical scaling but most mages. So you get the point. Most mages or magical scaling is not for protections is not inclusive for every single god. So that's why that was changed. Ratatoskr reduced HP per level from 75 to 73. That makes his base HP pool at level 20 a lot less, which makes him easier to kill late game. Punishes some of his mobility if he chooses to use it offensively. Good change. Acorn Blast reduced damage from 50 to 110 to 40 to 100. 10 damage, not that big of a deal. Hurts his early clear. But overall just makes Rat more defined. It makes him more of this high mobility god where if the player who's piloting him doesn't use his mobility correctly in any given situation, he will get absolutely destroyed for it, and I think that's good. Pretty small changes, but small changes are good. It just helps tweak a god in a certain direction. Ratatoskr, I don't think was overpowered, but was probably slightly over the level of balance, so this probably brings him down to the rest of the assassin class, so good change. Sylvanas, reduced time speed, or okay, what is that? Reduced time seed takes to sprout from 12 seconds to 5 seconds. So this is actually a cool change. I was never expecting them to make this change with Sylvanas. I would never even thought of this, but for those of you who didn't know, if you're Sylvanas and you use your 1, which is your root, on the ground and you don't hit any enemies with it, it'll just leave a little plant, and over time the plant will sprout up, and you can stand in a certain radius around it, and you get mana regeneration. So now the mana regeneration part of his kit is much more accessible. You can use it a lot more. It's stronger early game, a lot stronger early game actually. That helps his laning phase for him and his hunter a lot. So, for example, something I can think of off the top of my head is in lane, a god like AMC, even though he had really strong clear with his honey and his 2, he would use 2 abilities to clear the wave, and he would clear faster than most hunters, but obviously the downside to that is you're burning a lot of mana. Now something like Sylvanas could be matched with an AMC, where now you're picking this really, really high clear early duo lane, so that you're going to win the lane really hard, and that Sylvanas can help give AMC back some of that mana so that AMC can keep clearing and keep his advantage in lane. So that's a pretty cool application for it. Overall, utility is a good change. Utility is nice to have in the game. And 12 seconds is a really weird number to play around if you want mana regeneration. So overall, I like that change a lot. Okay, moving on to Vamana. Sleeping Giant, tooltip edited to remove the descriptions related to his ultimate. Okay. Colossal Fury, tooltip, so just tooltip stuff. Nothing big. And then Vulcan. This is the last change. After experimenting with a few different passives for Vulcan, we found that the best feeling came from a passive that rewards what he does best, poking enemy gods. His new passive increases his mobility and provides positive feedback to players that prioritize damaging enemy gods. So, whenever Vulcan successfully hits an enemy god with an ability, he gains 15 MP5, 15% movement speed. So, I'll touch on the MP5 bit of it first. That's a really, really cool passive change because they touched on it. Vulcan is like one of the few gods in the game where his role is just to keep harassing and poking the enemy team. And that's actually a really uncommon role in Smite. There's really not many gods that you look to for poke. There's really no poke comps that you run in competitive play. Like, they're all burst comps. And having a god that's designed around poking is really cool. It gives him a defined role. And giving him MP5 means that he can just keep poking and keep pumping out poke